To be able to shape a reverb to fit your mix, you need to first understand the basic anatomy of a reverb. So most, if not all, reverbs are made of two fundamental components. One are the early reflections, and the other is the tail, the decay part of the reverb. If you listen to this dry snare sound, and then add the early reflections, then add the late part, you get the full reverb. So each of these two parts have different parameters that you can tweak. So if we have a look at the early reflections, the two main important ones, at least in my opinion, are size, which is a kind of delay time which sets the different delay parts of the early reflections. If you listen to a small size here, you can hear that it's very dense and very close to you, while if you listen to a large size, it's much more spread out over time. The little delay taps are further apart. Then the second important parameter is diffusion. It's a kind of delay blur or density which makes the early reflections more or less like delays. If you listen to something like low diffusion, you'll be able to actually hear the individual delay taps of the reverb. You can hear how it's kind of grainy, and if you listen to high diffusion, it gets more spread out over time, as you can see here, and it also sounds smoother. Low diffusion again. High diffusion is more blurred out over time. Then the main parameter of the tail, of course, is the decay time. This decay time can be shaped for individual frequencies by changing both the base multiplier and the top multiplier, so damping. Basically, the base multiplier multiplies the decay time for the lower frequencies. So if you have a look here at these spectrograms, you can see that for a low base multiplier, the base frequencies here decay quicker than the rest of the reverb. While for a high base multiplier, the base, especially the fundamental here, decays for much longer. If you take a listen to this quite extreme example, I think you'll be able to hear quite clearly. Here is a low base multiplier. Listen to how the low frequencies decay first. And now a high base multiplier. Listen to the boominess and the long, strong decay of the fundamental. Low base multiplier, high base multiplier. Now an important parameter to change your reverb's relationship to the effect that you're to the track that you're placing it on are pre-delay and attack. They kind of do a similar thing, but one is a bit more subtle than the other. So pre-delay time basically just takes the entire reverb and shifts it back in time. So you can see here the drum sound that triggers the reverb. Then we have a lot of silence. This is the pre-delay time here. And then the whole reverb plays. While for an attack time, it's more of a fade into the tail, so it's a lot smoother. But they both are kind of useful of making sure that the reverb and the initial part of the sound aren't clashing. So if you have a listen to pre-delay, you'll hear quite clearly how it just stops and then starts again. This can be especially useful if you tune this to a rhythm in your sound, so the reverb is a kind of ghost note almost. Listen to how there's a quick burst of sound, then silence, then reverb. While for attack it's a lot smoother. It sort of blends into the reverb and then goes back out again. Then another important part of reverb are early, late, mix, dry, wet, and filters. These are basic mix controls you can find at almost any effect, but for reverbs, as always, they can help a lot to clean up your mix. So early, late mix, first of all, just changes the loudness of the early reflections we talked about and the tail. This can bring the reverb closer or further apart in your mix, and it can also change where the energy is distributed over time. The dry-wet, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. If you've got the reverb on ascend, of course, you're going to have the mix at 100% and have the dry sound on its original track. But if you've got the reverb on the track itself, you might want to turn down the mix a bit further so you can hear some of the original sound. And the filters are just a basic high cut and low cut in case you want some high bass multiplier, for example, but you don't really want sub in the reverb, or you don't really want the reverb clashing with your cymbals in the highs. This can be used to further shape the reverb. And now we come to convolution reverbs, which are basically reverbs sampled from a real space. These do have some tweakable parameters like pitch and envelopes. Basically, like any sample, you can pitch it up or down, you can change the volume over time. But overall, they're quite a static sound. Unlike reverbs, they are not different delays that move around. They're just one sampled impulse, so they can sound very realistic. But the most important part, if you want to choose a convolution reverb, is just to pick the right impulse response. So the tweakable parameters will only get you so far. And then a couple exercises, just so you get used to shaping your reverbs a bit, is just make 3 reverbs to test if you understood all these parameters. One in a big space with a long, low decay and a long attack that really rings out. A second one, a long, bright decay with a short bass decay and a short attack, so one that quickly turns into a high kind of sizzle, and one of a very small space with nonetheless quite a bit of decay that's sort of boomy, like you're in a small room or a little box. So yeah, I hope that helps you get some more controls of your reverbs, and see you in the next one.